Dive into the epic saga of Larry Hillman, hockey's unsung hero, in this gripping video. Born in the icy heart of Kirkland Lake, Ontario, Larry's journey from frozen ponds to NHL stardom is a tale of grit, glory, and heartbreak. At just 18, he etched his name as the youngest Stanley Cup champion with the Detroit Red Wings, a record that still stands. From Toronto's dynasty to the WHA's wild frontier, Larry's 6 cups and 2 Avco trophies showcase a career defined by quiet brilliance and relentless adaptability. But behind the triumphs lay a nomad's struggle, trades, demotions, and the weight of proving himself in a ruthless sport. Perfect for hockey fans and underdog lovers, this video uncovers the man who turned hardship into legend. Don't miss the story of the Hillman Firewall. Hit play, like, and subscribe for more untold sports stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. What's your favorite hockey moment? Let's celebrate Larry's legacy together. In the shadow of Ontario's gold mines, where winter stretched like a sentence and the sky hung heavy with slate-gray clouds, Larry Morley Hillman was born on February 5, 1937, in Kirkland Lake, a town carved from frost and ambition. The eldest of 3 brothers, Larry grew up in a world where hockey wasn't just a game, it was a religion, its rinks the altars where dreams were consecrated. The Hillman boys, Larry, Wayne, and Floyd, shared a bond forged on the frozen ponds behind their timber-framed home. Where the ice was uneven, the goals were marked by boots, and the only rule was to keep playing until the kitchen window glowed with their mother's call to dinner. Kirkland Lake was a crucible of hardship and hope. The mines that sustained the town bred a stoic resilience in its people, and for young Larry, every blister from a hand-me-down skate, every stitch in a patched sweater was a vow to escape the confines of those snow-draped streets. The ponds were his proving ground, where he learned to glide with a grace that belied his wiry frame, his stick an extension of his will. The brothers' games were fierce, their arguments over blocked shots and missed passes carrying into the night under skies streaked with auroras. Yet, even as a boy, Larry carried a quiet intensity, his eyes fixed on a horizon beyond the town's limits, where the roar of crowds and the gleam of silver trophies awaited. The Hillman household was a microcosm of the era's working-class ethos. Their father, a miner whose hands bore the scars of the earth, instilled a discipline that tempered the boys' wild energy. Their mother, a keeper of warmth in a cold world, ensured the family's modest means never dimmed their spirit. Hockey was their rebellion against the grind, a way to carve meaning from the long winters. For Larry, it was more than that. It was a map to a larger life, each game a step toward a destiny he could feel but not yet name. By 1953, at 16, Larry had outgrown the backyard rinks. He joined the Windsor Spitfires of the Ontario Hockey Association, a junior league where dreams were tested against the reality of bigger, faster competition. The Spitfires' dressing room was a cauldron of liniment and bravado, where boys barely old enough to shave traded barbs and tape their sticks with ritualistic care. Larry was no showman. He lacked the swagger of the spotlight chasers. Instead, he possessed a rarer gift, an almost supernatural sense of positioning. Coaches marveled at his ability to anticipate plays, to angle off attackers before the puck even reached them, as if he could see 3 seconds into the future. His teammates called it the Hillman Hunch. Scouts in the rafters scribbled it into their notebooks. Life in Windsor was a crash course in independence. Far from Kirkland Lake, Larry boarded with a local family, his days a blur of school, practice, and games. The Spitfires were a middling team, but Larry's steady play drew eyes. Halfway through the season, he was traded to the Hamilton Tiger Cubs, a move that taught him early the transient nature of a hockey career. Each new city, each new locker room, chipped away at his small-town innocence, replacing it with a resilience that would define him. In Hamilton, he honed his craft under coaches who preached discipline over flash, their words echoing his father's lessons. By season's end, his name was whispered in NHL circles, a prospect whose calm under pressure belied his age. The trades and bus rides were more than logistics. They were a young man's education in impermanence. Larry learned to pack light, to memorize new playbooks overnight, to win over teammates who eyed newcomers with suspicion. His suitcase, scuffed and patched, became a metaphor for his life. always ready to move, always carrying the weight of his ambitions. Yet, through it all, he held fast to the lessons of Kirkland Lake. Work hard, stay humble, and let the ice tell your story. The call came in the winter of 1955, as sudden and surreal as a fever dream. The Detroit Red Wings, perennial NHL powerhouses, were battered by injuries, their defensive core depleted. Desperate for fresh legs, they summoned Larry, not yet 19, from the junior ranks. On March 5, 1955, he stepped onto the ice at Detroit's Olympia Stadium, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the organist's ragtime riffs. The crowd, bundled in fedoras and fur-collared coats, roared as the puck dropped. Larry's first shift was brief, a handful of seconds that felt like years, but it was enough. He was in the NHL, a kid from nowhere skating alongside legends. The Red Wings were a dynasty, their roster studded with names like Gordie Howe and Ted Lindsay. Larry, with his round cheeks and barely there stubble, was an anomaly, a teenager in a world of grizzled veterans. Yet he held his own, his positional smarts compensating for his lack of size. 4 weeks later, on April 14, 1955, Detroit clinched the Stanley Cup against the Montreal Canadians, confetti raining down as the Olympia erupted. In the team photo, Larry stands at the edge, the cup hoisted high, his eyes wide with disbelief. At 18 years, 2 months, and 9 days, he became the youngest player ever to win the cup, a record that would stand unchallenged when the NHL later raised the minimum age for eligibility. The triumph was a pinnacle, but it came at a cost. Larry's youth made him a curiosity, a footnote in the Red Wings saga rather than a cornerstone. The veterans, hardened by years of battles, saw him as a kid who'd lucked into glory. He returned to the juniors the next season, his cup ring a heavy reminder of what he'd touched and lost. The experience left a scar, a quiet ache to prove he belonged not just as a fluke, but as a fixture. That ache would drive him for the next 2 decades, a silent fuel for a career defined by persistence over privilege. The years that followed were a blur of bus tickets and new jerseys. In 1957, Larry landed with the Boston Bruins, where he played 2 full NHL seasons. The Bruins were a team in transition, their glory days fading, and Larry's steady play was a rare bright spot. He logged heavy minutes, his defensive instincts thwarting opponents who underestimated the skinny kid from Ontario. But Boston, too, was a way station. By 1960, he was sent to the Providence Reds of the American Hockey League, a demotion that stung but didn't break him. In Providence, Larry found his stride. The AHL was a grinders' league, its rinks smaller, its crowds rowdier, its paychecks leaner. Yet Larry thrived, his game blossoming under the pressure of nightly battles. In 1961, he won the Eddie Shore Award as the league's best defenseman, his name etched alongside first All-Star honors. The accolade was validation, proof that his quiet excellence could shine even in the minors. But it also deepened his restlessness. Each trophy, each headline, was a reminder that the NHL remained his true stage, and he was still knocking on its door. The early 1960s saw Larry bounce between teams, Rochester, Springfield, Buffalo, each stop adding to his reputation as hockey's Marco Polo. His suitcase grew heavier, its contents a patchwork of memories. A Kirkland Lake postcard, a Bruins puck, a Providence program. He became the player coaches coveted but rarely kept. His adaptability a double-edged sword. He could slot into any system, any role, but his lack of flash made him expendable when rosters tightened. The constant movement wore on him, each new city a fresh start tinged with the loneliness of leaving friends behind. Yet he never complained, his Kirkland Lake stoicism a shield against the game's cruelties. In 1961, the Toronto Maple Leafs came calling, and with them, a chance at redemption. The Leafs were building a dynasty, their roster a blend of young fire and veteran guile. Larry, now in his mid-20s, was the perfect fit, a defensive anchor who could stabilize a blue line featuring stars like Tim Horton and Alan Stanley. From 1962 to 1967, Toronto won 4 Stanley Cups, each victory a testament to the team's depth and Larry's understated brilliance. The 1967 playoffs were his masterpiece. Paired with veteran Marcel Pronovost, Larry formed a defensive wall that suffocated opponents. In the Cup final against Montreal, the duo's even-strength shifts were flawless, allowing 0 goals against. Broadcasters dubbed it the Hillman Firewall, a nod to Larry's ability to neutralize threats with surgical precision. Off the ice, he remained the team's quiet conscience, reading Western paperbacks while teammates played poker, his dry humor a balm for tense road trips. When the Leafs hoisted the Cup on May 2, 1967, Larry's name was etched into history again, his 4th ring a symbol of his indispensability. But Toronto's triumph carried a shadow. The 1967 Cup was the Leafs' last before the NHL expanded from 6 teams to 12, a seismic shift that upended careers. Larry, now 30, was exposed in the expansion draft, his tenure with Toronto ending as abruptly as it had begun. The move to the Minnesota North Stars was a jolt, a reminder that loyalty in hockey was a luxury he couldn't afford. The pain of leaving Toronto lingered, a wound he carried quietly as he packed his suitcase once more. The 1967 NHL expansion draft was a seismic rupture in Larry Hillman's career, tearing him from the Toronto Maple Leafs dynasty and casting him into the uncharted waters of the Minnesota North Stars. At 30, he was no longer the wide-eyed kid who'd hoisted the Stanley Cup as a teenager with Detroit. He was a seasoned defenseman, his body a map of bruises and his mind a ledger of lessons learned across a decade of professional hockey. Yet, the move to Minnesota felt like a banishment, a cruel reminder that even 4 cup rings couldn't shield him from the game's merciless churn. The North Stars were a fledgling franchise, one of 6 new teams in an NHL doubling from its original 6. Their roster was a patchwork of veterans like Larry, deemed expendable by their former clubs, and rookies whose dreams outpaced their skills. The St. Paul Civic Center, their home rink, was a far cry from Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens, its bleachers half filled with fans still learning the sport's rhythms. The team's early games were chaotic, marked by blown leads and defensive lapses. Larry, with his impeccable positional timing, became an anchor amidst the storm. His calm presence steadied younger players, his voice in the locker room a quiet counterpoint to the coach's bellowing. He mentored rookies like Bill Goldsworthy, teaching them to read opponents' movements, to anticipate rather than react. Off the ice, he was the one who knew which diner served coffee strong enough to survive a Minnesota winter. His Kirkland Lake pragmatism, a lifeline in a city where losses piled up like snowdrifts. Yet, the North Stars' struggles gnawed at Larry. The team's 1935-20 record in their inaugural 1967-68 season was a stark contrast to Toronto's championship swagger. Each defeat felt personal, a dent in the pride of a man who'd built his career on winning. His role was vital, logging heavy minutes, killing penalties, neutralizing top forwards. But the scoreboard rarely rewarded his efforts. The Minnesota winters, brutal even by Ontario standards, mirrored his inner turmoil. Nights spent in a modest apartment, far from his wife Liz and their growing family, were haunted by questions of what might have been had he stayed in Toronto. The constant travel, the unfamiliar teammates, the pressure to prove his worth at an age when many defensemen began to fade. It all weighed on him, a silent burden he carried with the same stoicism that had seen him through countless trades. In the summer of 1968, salvation came in the form of a trade to the Montreal Canadians, a franchise synonymous with glory. The move was a homecoming of sorts, a chance to reclaim his place among hockey's elite. But Montreal was a different beast. The Canadians were a machine, their roster stacked with future Hall of Famers like Jean Béliveau and Jacques Lemaire, their legacy a towering shadow. Larry, now 31, was a depth defenseman, his ice time limited to spot shifts and penalty kills. The 1968-69 season saw Montreal dominate, culminating in a Stanley Cup victory over the St. Louis Blues. Larry's 6th cup ring should have been a triumph, but it felt hollow. His contributions were minimal, his name a footnote in the Canadiens' storied narrative. In the locker room celebrations, champagne soaking his jersey, he smiled for the cameras, but his heart ached. The cup, once a symbol of his teenage dreams, now felt like a borrowed crown, a reminder that he was no longer the indispensable force he'd been in Toronto. The trade to Montreal, followed by brief stints with the Philadelphia Flyers and Los Angeles Kings, deepened Larry's sense of displacement. Each new city brought fresh faces, new systems, new expectations, but also a growing realization that his prime was slipping away. By 1971, at 34, he was back in the minors with the Buffalo Bisons, his NHL dreams flickering. The demotion stung, a cruel echo of his Providence days, but it also rekindled his resolve. He played with a quiet ferocity, earning AHL's second All-Star honors in 1972, proof that his skills remained sharp even as his body tired. Yet, the minors were a purgatory, a place where veterans like Larry wrestled with the inevitability of decline. His suitcase, now a relic of a dozen moves, was heavier than ever, packed with memories of triumphs and regrets. The 1970s offered a new frontier, the World Hockey Association, WHA, a renegade league that promised bigger paychecks, looser rules, and a chance to rewrite his story. In 1973, Larry signed with the Cleveland Crusaders, a move that felt like stepping into a circus. The WHA was a wild departure from the NHL's buttoned-up traditions. Arenas pulsed with disco beats, promotions leaned into spectacle, and contracts were as flamboyant as the era's fashion. At 36, Larry was a grizzled veteran, his 6 Stanley Cup rings a badge of credibility in a league desperate for legitimacy. Cleveland's fans embraced him, their announcers hyping his championship pedigree under mirror ball spotlights. 6-time Stanley Cup champion Larry Hillman echoed through the Richfield Coliseum, a surreal contrast to the AHL's sparse crowds. In Cleveland, Larry found a second wind. The WHA's up-tempo style suited his cerebral game. He leaned on his anticipation, his ability to read plays 3 seconds ahead, to neutralize younger, faster forwards. Off the ice, he was a mentor to rookies who'd grown up watching his Maple Leafs highlights, sharing stories of Toronto's dynasty over beers and dive bars. But the WHA's chaos, last-minute trades, shaky finances, mid-season roster shakeups, tested even his adaptability. The Crusaders' 1974-75 season ended in a playoff loss, and Larry, nearing 38, felt the weight of time. His body ached after games, his knees creaking from years of blocking shots. Liz, ever his rock, mailed letters filled with encouragement, but the distance from home was a constant ache. In 1975, Larry was traded to the Winnipeg Jets, a WHA powerhouse with a rabid fan base. The Jets were a perfect fit, their roster blending veterans and young stars like Bobby Hull. Larry's role was familiar: stabilize the blue line, mentor the kids, win. The 1975-76 season was a revelation. He played 73 games, his steady presence a counterpoint to the Jets' offensive fireworks. When Winnipeg hoisted the Avco Trophy in May 1976, sweeping the Houston Aeros, Larry's 7th major championship felt like a defiant middle finger to Father Time. At 39, he was still collecting hardware, his grin in the team photo as wide as it had been in Detroit 2 decades earlier. But the victory was bittersweet. The WHA's instability loomed, and Larry knew his playing days were numbered. Each stride on the ice was a battle against his own mortality, a refusal to let the game define his end. Retirement beckoned, but Winnipeg had other plans. In 1977, the Jets named Larry head coach, thrusting him into a role he hadn't sought. At 40, he was younger than many of his peers behind the bench. His 6 cups, an Avco trophy, a resume few could match. The transition was jarring. As a player, he'd controlled his fate with his skates. As a coach, he was at the mercy of 20 egos and a fickle front office. Yet, he embraced the challenge with the same quiet resolve that had defined his career. The 1977-78 season was a triumph. Larry's Jets played with discipline and grit, finishing with a 50-28-2 record, a .638 winning percentage that stunned pundits. His bench demeanor, arms folded, eyes scanning the ice, was a stark contrast to the clipboard-smashing norm. He coached like he played, cerebral, understated, trusting his instincts. When Winnipeg won the Avco Trophy, defeating the New England Whalers, Larry became the first man to win the WHA's championship as both player and coach. The victory should have cemented his legacy, but hockey's cruelty was unrelenting. The 1978-79 season began with a 9-12-2 slump, and management, impatient for results, fired him before the playoffs. The decision was a gut punch, a betrayal after all he'd given. Yet, Larry's response was pure Kirkland Lake. "That's hockey, kids?" He walked away with no bitterness, only gratitude for the ride, his dignity intact, even as fans argued the move was premature. Post-hockey life brought Larry back to Ontario, to a townhouse on Lake Temiskaming, where the sunrise painted the water pink. Kirkland Lake welcomed him as a prodigal son, its streets unchanged from the days he'd skated its ponds. At 41, he was no longer the restless nomad. He was a patriarch, his life's work etched in the lines on his face. He threw himself into the community, fixing rinks with the same care he'd once taped his stick, coaching kids who dreamed as he once did, reading names at Remembrance Day ceremonies with a gravitas that hushed the crowd. His presence was a quiet gift, a reminder that heroes could come home. Family remained his anchor. Liz, his lifelong partner, had weathered every trade, every late-night call, her love a constant through the chaos. Brothers Wayne and Floyd, both NHL veterans, joined him for holiday shinny games, their laughter echoing the backyard battles of their youth. Nephew Brian Savage, an NHLer in the 1990s, credited Uncle Larry for teaching him that brains trumped brawn. Hillman reunions were a tapestry of hockey tales, each story a thread in a legacy that spanned generations. Liz hung the same black and white photo above every sofa, a frozen moment from their first dance in Kirkland Lake, a reminder of the life they'd built through every move. In 2009, the Rochester Americans inducted Larry into their Hall of Fame, a love letter to his AHL years. The ceremony was a sea of nostalgia, old teammates and fans filling the arena. Larry's speech typically deflected praise, honoring the Zamboni drivers who'd worked double shifts during 1960s blizzards. The standing ovation lasted long enough to fog the beers, a fitting tribute to a man who'd given everything to the game. Yet, even in that moment of adulation, Larry's thoughts drifted to Kirkland Lake, to the ponds where it all began, to the boy who dared to dream beyond the snow. On May 31st, 2022, Larry Hillman slipped away in a Sudbury hospital, his body frail at 85, but his spirit unbroken. Liz held his hand, her touch a tether to a life of love and loss. Photos of Wayne and Floyd lined the walls, grandkids' crayon drawings of hockey sticks fluttering in the air conditioner's breeze. The news broke a week later, and the hockey world paused. Rochester tweeted a black and white image of Larry in his Reds jersey. Toronto's sports radio opened its lines, callers' voices cracking as they recalled number 16 blocking shots with his ribcage. Social media flooded with tributes, reminding younger fans that dynasties were built on unsung heroes like Hillman. His legacy, 6 Stanley Cups, 2 Avco trophies, 1,356 games across 3 leagues, was a monument to adaptability and quiet excellence. But it was his humanity that endured. Larry was the kid who skated through blizzards to chase a dream, the nomad who turned every city into a home, the champion who proved humility could outshine flash. His story, like the moonlit ice of Kirkland Lake, remains a beacon for those who dare to glide where legends are made, a testament to the power of persistence in the face of a game that gives and takes in equal measure.